السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Alhamdulillah, it's good to be back in person, inshallah. And alhamdulillah, we are nearing the end actually. Today we have reached Surah Al-Ikhlas. And today's goal will be to, inshallah ta'ala, cover Surah Al-Ikhlas. Surah Al-Ikhlas, if you open up your Mus'haf on your phone if you'd like, or if you have a hard copy in front of you. Surah Al-Ikhlas is Surah number 112, so third to last, right? And as always, firstly we'll go over the names of Surah Al-Ikhlas, the names of the surah, some context about the revelation, and then we'll get into the actual surah itself. So the very famous name obviously is Al-Ikhlas, right? But the actual name from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that we find is actually قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. And we've spoken about this before, that the beginning phrase of the surah is usually used as the actual name of the surah itself. So Surah قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ makes a lot of sense. Of the names that are, what's unique about this surah, first of all, is that the names of the surah, if you were to gather names and nicknames, so we're talking about the time of the Prophet, the companions and the tabi'un, you'd find about 30, which is actually very, very surprising. And I've spoken about this multiple times. The reason and the explanation behind why there's multiple reasons, or why there's multiple names, but interestingly, this one has about 20 to 30. Some of them we'll go over, but that initially just shows the amount of importance that's placed on it and the amount of love that the companions and the Muslims have had for it. Because when something has a lot of names, it means that it's either something very important. That's why, for example, the Day of Judgment has a lot of names, right? Allah Himself has a lot of names. Our Prophet ﷺ, there's multiple names for him, right? Because when something is very important, you find different ways to describe it or describe them. And secondly, when someone is very beloved to you, like if you're the youngest child maybe, right? Or you're the youngest cousin, or you're the oldest cousin in your family, you hold a special place for some reason, you'll find that you have generally more nicknames than the others, as a sign of extra love or extra attention paid. And similarly is the case with Surah Al-Ikhlas. There's a lot of names, and we'll go through some of them, and ironically most of them will give us a tafsir of the surah themselves. Imam al-Biqa'i, along with Al-Faqr al-Razi, along with other Mufassirun, this is gathered from all of their works. Of the most famous of them is Al-Muqashqishah. Al-Muqashqishah. Surah Al-Kafirun is also named Al-Muqashqishah. And Qashqasha yuqashqishu, it's a funny word, but a lot of the words in the Arabic language, the sound that they make is actually a meaning that they give. So qashqash, if you think of cutting through something, qashqasha means to get rid of something. And the reason why this surah and Kafirun are known as both as muqashqisha is because they cut off shirk and they cut off nifaq, hypocrisy. Also, of the names given is at-tajreed. Right? This is mentioned from some of the companions at tajreed. And tajreed means for something to strip it apart. And all of the shirk and all of the concepts, the wrong concepts regarding Allah are stripped out in this. Also is tawheed. That makes a lot of sense because the oneness of Allah, this is the prime surah for explaining to it. Also, then a name that's used is Surah An-Nisbah. And this is very important. This is actually why the surah was revealed. And so what happened is that this surah is, obviously it's a Meccan surah. What happened is that some of the mushrikun, they asked the Prophet ﷺ that صِفْ لَنَا رَبَّكَ, or unsub lana rabbak, that why don't you tell us the lineage of your Lord? So our lineage is that our Fulan and Fulan that we worship, they are the son of X, Y, and Z, who's the son of X, Y, and Z, daughter of X, Y, and Z. There's a whole lineage that they have. What's the lineage of Allah? Where does Allah come from? Give us some context about that. And in this, in another narration, it's mentioned that they said, "Sif lana rabbak." One mushrik, he came and he asked the Prophet ﷺ that, why don't you describe to us your Lord? Amin khashabin huwa, is he from wood? Amin dhahabin, is he from gold? Is he from silver? Because there, amin hadidin, amin nuhasan, is he from iron, from a type of metal? Because from their aspect, all the lords are made of physical things. Right, and that's why you'll hear stories that, for example, of the companion who later accepted Islam, who said that I realized that my shirk was so ridiculous when I didn't have anything, so I made my idol out of dates. And when I got hungry, I ate my own idol. He just ate up his own idol, right? How, if you think of the concept. And so they used to make it with what? With wood, with metals, with gold, with silver, with different things. And so he said, well, what is Allah? Is Allah made out of gold? Is Allah made out of silver? And so these questions were asked. And so Surah An-Nisba, because the Nisba of Allah, what is the lineage of Allah? Does Allah have a lineage or does He not? That's explained in this surah. Also Surah Al-Mu'awwidha. The last two surahs that we'll do, Falaq and Nas, they're known as Mu'awwidhatain, because the Prophet ﷺ prescribed them for us to use to repel evil things, to repel, to fight off jealousy, to fight off harmful effects. Al-Ikhlas is also, in many narrations, we find that there are authentic virtues for this surah as well. So the three quls that we say, Ikhlas, Qul huwallahu ahad, Qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq, Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, all three of them, reciting them for protection in the morning and the evening, generally reciting them, there's a lot of emphasis on that because of the importance of the surah, and so is Al-Ikhlas. So these are some of the names. One of them is Al-Asas, and there's an interesting hadith here that's reported from Anas radiallahu an and Ubay ibn Ka'ab radiallahu an as well, and he said that أُسِّسَتِ السَّمَوَاتُ السَّبْعُ وَالْأَرْضُونَ السَّبْعُ عَلَى قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, that the seven heavens and the seven earth, the seven layers of the earth, they're standing upon قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. And so if you pair this with another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that the day of judgment would not come until there's a person saying Allah, Allah, until someone's remembering Allah. And then when that ceases, when there's no one to mention Allah, then things will fall in order and the day of judgment will come, because the only reason everything was created was for Allah. And so the moment it's all done, there's no one to name Allah, then the whole point, everything is over by that time. And so it's the asas, meaning literally the heavens and the earth are standing on La ilaha illallah. That's why in Surah Maryam Allah says that those who claim that Allah has a partner, this is such an atrocious nisbah, it's such an atrocious description of Allah, that takadu as-samawatu yatafattarna min fawqihin, that it's as if the skies want to burst open because of what they witness. Because from our perspective, from a faith perspective, we say that everything praises Allah. Because Allah says all creations and all animals and rocks and everything is what? It praises Allah. So we learned that it's al-asas, it is the pillar to it. Something else so these are just some of the names. Something else that we learn about this, we already said that it's loved a lot, is that there's a lot of reports of companions constantly reciting it. So one of the companions, as Aisha radiallahu anha narrates, that the people came and complained to the Prophet ﷺ that this companion, he leads us in Masjid Quba, right outside of Medina. And in every time he leads, he recites Surah Al-Ikhlas. And the Prophet ﷺ called him. He said, why do you do this? Why do you constantly repeat Surah Al-Ikhlas? And he said, because I find in it Sifatul Rahman. I find in it that Allah is described. So I love the surah. And the Prophet said that because you love the surah, Allah loves you. So we learned that there's a lot of passion towards it. There's multiple ahadith, there's maybe 8 or 9 in total of different companions having a strong connection to Surah Al-Ikhlas. And from here we get one of the ahadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, it's an authentic narration, Sahih Muslim, etc., that the Prophet ﷺ said that Surah Al-Ikhlasi or Surah Qul Huwallahu Ahad ta'adilu thuluth al-Quran, that it's equivalent to a third of the Quran. But here, this is one of the most asked questions, especially in Ramadan. This is one of the most common misconceptions that we often have. We need to pause for a moment and understand what does it mean that Ikhlas is a third of the Quran. There's about 2 or 3 explanations for it. The first being that what Ikhlas contains, it's from that which the Quran, from a third of what the Quran addresses. So if you were to broadly divide the Quran, you can divide it into three categories. There's ahkam, there's rulings, right? How to marry, how to divorce, how does the process of inheritance work, when do you fast, all of that stuff. And then those are ahkam, those are rulings. Then you have akhbar, you have news, or you have stories, either of the past, so past nations, for example, the creation of Adam, for example, or the future, for example, the Day of Judgment and what's going to happen there. So you have information, you have news. The third is Tawheed. You have the oneness of Allah, the greatness of Allah. And because it's such a central part, Surah Al-Ikhlas, if theoretically, if you did not know anything else about Allah and His Tawheed, then Surah Al-Ikhlas should suffice you. And these last 10 surahs, one of the reasons we did them is because, ironically, even the person who sees themselves as not very religious perhaps, or the person who doesn't have a lot of background in religious education, they at least usually know the last 10 surahs. And sometimes we may look down on them and make fun of that, which is not right. Everyone has probably not had the opportunity, or there's other things that happen. But one of the things is, just if the last 10 surahs, if you just internalize the message of them, that in and of itself is really a huge treasure of information. And in the last 10 surahs, Ikhlas is about Allah only. And if you look at the subject matter, and in our last session we'll go over them, each of the 10 talks about something very specific about the deen, something very important. Broadly it's covered. And that's why Imam al-Shawkani and others said that Ikhlas in the last 10 is devoted to the love of Allah, and Kawthar is devoted to the love of the Prophet ﷺ. The two shortest surahs in the Quran, one is about Allah, one is about the maqam, the station of the Prophet ﷺ. Both Allah and His Messenger are described, things are clarified. So, ta'adilu thuluth al-Quran, it's equivalent to the third of the Quran. That's one explanation. The second is that in the reward, its explanation, you would get rewarded for a third of the Quran. But the question comes, what if we recite Ikhlas 3 times? Does that mean that 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3 equals a whole? And so, that's not how we're supposed to look at this stuff. That's not how reward works. It's not exactly a mathematical system, right? And even if we look at it like that, it would still mean that you get the reward of a third of the Quran. But if you recite it again, you get the reward of a third of the Quran as well, but not of a different third, of that same third, because it's that Tawheed that you're perfecting. So there's no disagreement that if you recite Surah Al-Ikhlas 3 times, or if you recite the entire Quran, it's the same thing, right? Why would anyone recite the entire Quran ever? That's the biggest shortcut. So that's not how it works, and that's not how it's supposed to be taken. Rather, it's supposed to be a means of encouragement that, even this surah itself is great in meaning, and you have a third of the Quran unlocked, and now you need to get into the other 2/3. And so that explains the basic concepts about the surah. And we also covered how it was revealed in the particular instance. So let's get into the actual surah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. The word qul is used 4 times in the last 10 surahs. You had qul ya ayyuhal kafirun, then you have qul huwa Allahu ahad, then you'll have qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq, qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas. Generally, when qul is used in the Quran, it's to respond to something. So for example, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الشَّهْرِ الْحَرَامِ قِتَالٍ فِيهِ. They ask you, O Prophet of Allah, about killing or fighting in the sacred months. قُل, say, killing or fighting in the sacred months is prohibited. قُل قِتَالٌ فِيهِ كَبِيرٌ, it's a major sin. So there's a يَسْأَلُونَك, they're asking you, you say, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Here it's something similar, because what was the question being asked? Although it's not mentioned in the exact surah, what was the question being asked? The lineage. Someone asked that, what is the lineage of Allah? Or what is He made of? Is He from wood or gold or silver? What is this Allah of yours? And so in other words, He's saying, Qul, now answer to him, this person, that this is who Allah is. Secondly, Qul also means say, propagate, teach. And so one of the things that we're supposed to be very proud of, one of the things we're supposed to preach and share is about Allah, is about His Tawheed. It's a central part of it. And so the Prophet ﷺ is being told that you need to share this. The entire Quran is to be shared. It's for the balagh, it's for making it reach everyone. But this specifically, you need to make sure it's widespread. Qul, say, huwa Allahu ahad. Huwa means He in the Arabic language, it's a dhamir, it's a pronoun. Allah is a proper noun, Allah, and ahad means one. Now, technically, if you said qul Allahu ahad, say that Allah is one, and we'll use one. I'll explain ahad what it means. That would have been enough. But it's as if the huwa is being used, dhamir shan, it's being used to tie a specific type of commonality here. See, everyone believed in Allah. No one denied Allah. We often don't think of that. Everyone believed in Allah. The pagans of Mecca believed in Allah. The Christians believe in Allah. The Jews believe in Allah. Everyone believes in Allah. But so that huwa is being used. But Allah is not, they don't believe in Him in the correct way. They don't believe in Him in the most perfect way. There is some deficiency in their understanding. There's some mistake in their understanding. The actual concept is there. And so even the mushrikun of Makkah, when they went for Hajj, the labbaik that we say, labbaik Allahumma, labbaik, what did they say? Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika laka, illa sharikan huwa laka tamlikuhu wa ma malak. That this is their version, like their distorted version, that labbaik, Allah, I'm at your service, I'm coming to you. La sharika lak, there's no partner for you, right? That this much we say as well. Illa sharika lak, except for a partner that you have taken. And you own him and he doesn't own you. So you see the concept there. The concept is that there is Allah, He is like the supreme God, and that there's these demigods, like semi-gods in the middle. And then we are so sinful that we need to reach out to these smaller gods, right? And they can be people, righteous people perhaps, right? Or they could have been prophets, like Isa alayhi salam was a prophet, but then later on he was turned into a god or semi-god, or depending on your understanding of the Trinity and which sect you belong to in Christianity, some concept that between Allah and us there's Isa alayhi salam, there's Jesus, just Jesus. And so my ibadah needs to go towards them. And this Surah Al-Ikhlas, it also helps us understand, actually, even in the Muslim world, obviously there's shirk around, but even within Muslims themselves, if you travel the Muslim world, particularly in the East, particularly in rural areas, villages, and I've seen myself, there may not be explicit clear shirk, but there is a pathway to shirk, it's as if. And so that's why in many places, if you go, they won't make dua to Allah. Where do you go to make dua to? Where do you go to make dua to? Those from the subcontinent should know this. A lot of people, where do they go make dua to? To mazars, right? To graves. And so today, like, I have a really thing, so what am I going to do? I'm going to stop on my way back at the mazar. A mazar basically means a grave, right? Mazar because yuzar, meaning it's visited. It's a grave. And if you went to visit the grave for a noble purpose, that's completely fine, right? There's noble purposes to visit it, such as remembering death, such as simply going there to say salam. That's proven from the Prophet ﷺ. But you went there to make dua to that person. Why? Because Hamza Imtiaz, I'm very sinful. And so in order for my dua to be accepted, I need to first go to a person who is accepted by Allah. Right? And most of them they're good, righteous people. But then you go to them and then you make dua to them. And then you say, Ya Fulan, you're in the grave. Why don't you make dua for me? You ask Allah. Okay? And then there's different levels to it. It's confusing. Some people will say that you make dua to Allah. Some people will literally say that you give me. That if your gaze of mercy falls on me, I'll have a child. I'll get a job. I'll get out of my debt. My mother will be cured. Whatever your personal problem is you're going through. And so the Surah Al-Ikhlas is a great way to show that how even at times, even Muslims, sometimes they can stray off and they may not be completely believing in another God, but they're almost there because they've taken someone else in the middle in some capacity. And it could be to the point where it can literally be shirk, and it could be to a point that's less, but the problem is still there. There's someone being inserted between you and between Allah. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. So say He, this same person, this same being that you think of, we think of Him too. His name is Allah, and He is Ahad. He is Ahad. Let's understand Ahad. There's two words in the Arabic language for one. There's Ahad, and there's Wahid. Right? But they're different. Wahid means one. And Ahad means the only. So Wahid, there can be multiple Wahids. Like you can say, Hunaka Wahid, there's one person over here, Hunaka Wahid, meaning one person, right? There's one here, there's one in the Tafsir room, one over there. But you can't say that Hunaka Ahadun wa Hunaka Ahadun wa Hunaka Ahad. You cannot say that there's, describing the same person, that there's multiple, there's an only person here and there's an only person there. In the sense that when you say Ahad, you're referring to a being that is alone, there's no one like them. So wahid, it means that you are singular in your being. So this is like a single human, right? But then there's other humans. But this human is singular in its physical shape. But there's other humans similar to them in age, similar to them in color, similar to them in education, maybe in looks, right? There's one chair here, but then there's another chair. And this chair is singular, it's one, but then there's another chair, it's also one. But what you can do is you can do 1 + 1 = 2. They're similar, they're the same color, they're built of the same material, so there's similarity. When we say Allah is ahad, Allah is physically in the sense that Allah is separated from everything. Allah does not live within us. He doesn't live like in our bones and in our flesh, the way that maybe other religions believe. He doesn't live like in the trees and in the physical world around us. He doesn't live within Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. He doesn't live within an idol. Allah is not physically connected to anything. And not only that, Allah's meaning, His attributes, His names are also separate from everything else. So when we say Allah is, for example, when we say Allah is Alim, Allah is all knowledgeable. Or Alim actually just means knowledgeable. Can we say a human being is also Alim? Right? We can. Right? We can say this is a very knowledgeable person. In fact, Alim is very close to Alim. Or when we say Allah is Hakim, can we say a human is Hakim? We say it all the time. This is a person with a lot of hikmah, he's a lot of wisdom. He's a good leader. Right? Like our Dr. Tahir. Inshallah. So you use it all the time. You use different things to describe people. So you use these words, right? So the concept being, but when we say that a person is Hakim, they're a good leader, they're wise. Do we say they're as wise as Allah? No, they're not. Their wisdom can fall short sometimes. It may not be perfect. It may have some lapses in them. Their knowledge is not perfect. Their knowledge is limited. Their knowledge has an end to it. It has a beginning to it. So when we say it for Allah, Allah is alone and unique in every one of His qualities. Allah's knowledge, His hikmah, His wisdom, His power, His forgiveness, His mercy, His anger, everything that is of Allah, the only similarity between us and Allah is that we have a small amount of it. We have knowledge too. So we know what time it is right now, we know what day it is right now, we know what we're wearing, but our knowledge falls short because we don't know what's going to happen an hour later, or we don't know whether I'm going to live tomorrow. Or we don't know that what's going to be the weather like in 4 years on this very same date. Our knowledge is limited. Allah's knowledge is limitless. And so here, the concept being that they understood that Allah is physically separate. There is another God, a supreme being, Allah. But Allah's qualities, they said that no, Allah has relegated. Allah has said that, okay, my ability to give rizq, I give to this idol. And then this idol is an agent on my behalf. It has access to all the rizq accounts, right? So they would go to this idol for rizq. They'd go to this. And those of you that perhaps have read, Roman mythology, right? Or Greek mythology, for example. There's a concept of, the god of love, the god of war, right? Zeus and all this there's different gods, and each one of them has a weakness. Each one of them particularly has a control over something, over love, over war, over something. So things are divided. That's not how Allah is. Allahu Samad. Allahu Samad. Allah is As-Samad. The easiest way to translate it is that, as Ar-Raghib al-Asfahani, the great linguist, says that Samada ilayhi ay tawajjaha ilayhi. Allah is the one that you're supposed to turn to. Allah is the one you're supposed to ask. You're supposed to ask from. Allah is the one you're supposed to trust on. Allah is the one you're supposed to rely on. And so this is some basic stuff. We know this, right? We're like, okay, what's the big deal? I prayed Isha, prayed for Allah, I made dua to Allah. But for them at that time, this is groundbreaking, because you're telling them that, look, your current system is broken. So stop going for your rizq, for your money, for your food to someone else, and for your, war issues to someone else, and stop doing that. What you need to do is you need to direct everything to Allah. What they used to do is they used to direct only certain things to Allah. So for example, Allah says in Surah Al-Ra'd that when there was a huge storm at sea, then they would make dua to Allah. Because they'd say, okay, now this is so big. If any of you have gone by boat or by ship, anytime you've ever even faced a little bit of a storm, much less like a massive storm that you're stuck in the middle of, you would know how your iman is tested, right? Our equivalent is turbulence in the airplane. If it gets kind of bad, everyone starts reading the kalima right there, because you're scared. So now you're all of a sudden in the sea, and your ship is going up and down. There's waves and there's thunders, darkness and clouds, and you're like, that's it, we're gone. Then they made dua to Allah. They said, okay, now the idols can't. Okay, now we need to go all the way upstairs, full to Allah directly, because now He can help us, because it's outside of the control of these. So then they make dua to Allah. So this whole concept is being changed for them. No, it's simple. You make dua to Allah only. And one of the reasons why this surah is so beautiful, actually, one of the very, very interesting ways is if you teach your kids Surah Al-Ikhlas and you talk to them about Surah Al-Ikhlas, you'll find out how powerful it is. It just makes sense. For someone who is of a different religion to explain to your child the concept of reincarnation, the concept of the Trinity, the concept that gods are multiple, or they exist, or they come back, and all of this stuff, it's so complicated. But the concept of Tawheed, it's so simple, it's so beautiful, it puts you at rest and ease. And whether you're a child, whether you're an adult, whether you're a very heavily educated person, a professor, an academic, or whether you're a simple farmer in some village, you can understand and appreciate Tawheed. You can connect to Tawheed. It makes sense, it's pure, it's simple, it's the fitrah. And the psychology of shirk here is being broken. So قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ. Allah is the one you're supposed to direct to, right? We spoke about how, so our dua is to Allah. No matter how sinful you are, there is no, we don't no one comes into the Imam's office and says, Father, forgive me for I have sinned, right? We don't have this concept of a confession like that. We don't say, okay, you have to ask me for tawbah, then, tomorrow I'll talk to Allah, I'll ask you for tawbah. None of that stuff exists. It's very simple. It's between you and Allah. You need to do the tawbah. You need to do the istighfar. You need to make the dua. Even the concept of istikhara. Many people reach out and they say that, I'm interested, can do istikhara on my behalf. And we have to tell them that that's not how istikhara works. I'm not supposed to do it on your behalf. You're supposed to do istikhara for yourself. It doesn't work like that. But these are misconceptions that we have to understand and correct. But again, Surah Al-Ikhlas is very powerful for that. Allahu Samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. Okay, now we're really getting into it. Ayah number 3. The question asked was what? What's Allah's nasab? What's His lineage? Lam yalid, He never gave birth. Walam, or He never fathered someone. You can say that, either or. Walam yulad, and He was never born to anyone. So both things are, again, their concept of idols and even their concept of Allah had just been distorted, that everyone is born and everyone has a child. So for example, the Christians, they said that Jesus, alayhi salam, is Allah's son. So Allah is a child. The Quraysh of Makkah, they said Allah's children are the angels. They're the daughters of Allah, right? And so there's a concept that Allah is children. So Allah, first of all, Allah is not born. So there's no nasab, there's no lineage. And what does that mean? That means if Allah is not born, then Allah has no beginning. Because if you're born, you have a beginning point on this particular date in 1955, in 65, 75. And a particular date, this is where your lifespan started from. Allah does not have a beginning point. And walam yulad, Allah does not have children. Both are extreme displays of weakness. One is because if you come from someone, that means there was a time that you were not there and a time that you were dependent. I have a 6-month-old infant, and I know that if you leave a baby for maybe a few hours unattended, there could be a life-threatening consequence for the baby. A baby can't be left alone. It has to have someone carrying, someone looking after. It's so dependent. And so Allah was never dependent on anyone that for a few years He needed it. Then when the child is old enough, the child is able to walk, see, everything like that, the child can fend off for themselves. That doesn't happen with Allah. There was no weak point. There was no beginning. That never happened. The other weakness is children. Even if you don't want children, because for a person doesn't want children, for example, they have other goals in life or whatnot, there does come a point in time where us as humans, nearly almost every human wants a child. And there's multiple reasons behind that. And we don't ever actually think about it. One of the reasons actually that we won't, the Quran mentions that the Prophet ﷺ says that in Jannah we won't have children, is because the desire for children is actually our way of fulfilling our desire to be immortal. So I won't live on, but my children will live on. And my family name will be passed down. And it will be carried on. And the only people, maybe a generation 2, 3, to remember me will be my grandkids. Everyone else will forget me. Life moves on, people remarry, everything happens. But those that come after me, they'll at least remember me by your name. Oh, okay, that was who your parent was. So that means that you need to die. Allah has no end, so He doesn't need children. Allah is not going to grow old, so He doesn't need children. He doesn't need children to rely upon. Allah is immortal, meaning Allah does not have an end. Allah doesn't have a beginning, He doesn't have an end. So He doesn't need someone to carry on His name. None of these things apply to Allah. Ahad, the same concept. Allah is unique. Allah is different from everyone else. So lam yalid wa lam yulad. Allah does not, He has not fathered a child, and He was not born to anyone. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ. The last ayah. And the way that this should be read actually is وَلَمْ يَكُنْ أَحَدٌ كُفُوًا لَهُ. Like technically that's how it should be read, but there's a reason why. Sometimes what happens is that in the Arabic language there's a concept called taqdeem, which is that a certain word that's supposed to تقديم ما يتأخر عادة, something that's supposed to come after, it's placed first for its importance. To end off and to make an emphasis, Allah does not have, He will not have. There is no kufu. There's no one that's equivalent to Allah. So the concept of kafa, the concept of kufu, is something that you can't take out of everything else. It's an expansion of ahad. Everything in the world, everything that you can think of, there's something that if it's not the same, it does compare to it. It does come near to it. Even the Prophet ﷺ. Because we can say what? The other prophets, right? We can say the prophets are all brothers. And our Prophet ﷺ is the leader of all the prophets, but the other prophets are with him in the same category. If we say a companion, if we say Abu Bakr, you can say, well, Umar is right there, along with him, Uthman, Ali, all the other companions. Any person, anything that you take, you can add someone there, a concept of kafa'a, a concept of similarity. And the reason why this is so important, this is actually also supposed to help us, this is the last thing, inshallah, to dispel the psychology of shirk. See, in order for us to think that the world can work, everything needs either a partner or either a similar. Imagine if like the last electrician died on earth, the last one. Imagine what would happen. Right? We'd be looking for someone. There's no one that knows anything about it. Imagine if the last plumber died on earth. Imagine if the last doctor died on earth. The last health professional. We know nothing about what to do. And so our concept is that whatever is there, whoever is there has to be another. Even for things, there has to be another body of water. There has to be another tree. There has to be another place where you can mine gold. There is a second to everything. And even in when we get married, we use the same concept of kafa'a is used, right? So in marriage, one of the things that's sunnah is to look for a kufu, literally a kufu, which means someone who is of a similar, who is of a similar nature to you, you can say. Someone with perhaps a similar socioeconomic background. Someone perhaps of a similar culture, right? Someone perhaps of a similar age. There's similarities that are found that, okay, because if the age gap is too much, there's going to be there's an indifference there in terms of communication. If the cultural gap is way too much, they can't relate on many things, right? Perhaps if the economic background is way too much, it doesn't set suit. So you look for people that are similar to you, maybe similar background, maybe similar education background, maybe similar place you grew up, similar town, right? Similar age. There's similarities that you look at in order for things to work. With Allah, it doesn't work like that. There's no similarity. There's no second. There's no something else that has to be there in order for it to work. As a matter of fact, Allah says that if there was another God, لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله. If other than Allah there was another God, لفسدت, everything would break. Everything would go to ruins. Allah is the only being in the entirety of the universe that there is no second, there is no similar, and had there been a similar, things would finish off. Right? And so, and then the last thing to discuss under this is that by the end of this surah, the purpose that we're supposed to take home is that some of the surahs before this were talking about all different types of concepts. But this is the surah that hits exactly home about what the message of Islam is. So Allah is talking to the people of Mecca about Ashabul Fil and how they were punished because of what they tried to do. Then he's talking about the maqam, the station of the Prophet ﷺ. He's talking, "O Prophet, talk to the kafirun, talk to the disbelievers, tell them, I don't worship what you worship, you don't worship what I worship, I'll never worship what you worship, you'll never worship what I worship." There's this whole conversation, right? But what is it exactly that you worship? Who is the one that actually destroyed the Ashabul Fil? Who is the Lord of this, Muhammad ﷺ? The help of Allah is coming. Well, who is Allah? All of that is clarified in this surah. So this surah is probably one of the most important surahs of the last 10. It's extremely important for our children to ensure that they memorize it, they talk about it, they reflect on it. For us to momentarily reflect upon it, we read Surah Al-Ikhlas hurriedly and Surah Al-Kawthar, but if we were to really pause and think and reflect, it would change significantly our outlook on things and help us affirm our belief in our aqidah. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to make us a people of tawheed, a people of the oneness of Allah, who always rely on Allah and who appreciate and be from those that love Surah Al-Ikhlas, and hence that Allah loves us. Inshallah, next week we'll continue with Surah Al-Falaq. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.